that happens, get started. Okay, good morning to those of you who are able to join us. We're doing the Monitoring and Evaluation webinar for the Rockefeller Innovation Proposals. My name is Jade Lamb, and I'm here with Carrie Bruce. We both work for PACT, the Monitoring and Evaluation unit there. And we're available throughout your grant application process to offer technical assistance on the monitoring and evaluation piece of your proposals. So this is kind of the first service that we're giving you, just to go over some of the basic things that we think that you'll need to know. And we're hoping that this webinar will both help you tell your stories and show project results, and also help you meet Rockefeller's basic M&E requirements. At the end of the webinar, we'll go a bit more into depth into the other services that we can provide to you during the process. The first thing that we're going to discuss this morning is the importance of having a good M&E plan. Then we'll talk a bit about a theory of change. I know that Maggie's already sent you some resources related to that. And then after theory of change, we'll talk about success stories. Then we're going to go into the Rockefeller-specific M&E requirements and go through the monitoring requirements and the evaluation plan requirements that Rockefeller put in the solicitation, just to make sure that you have the tools necessary to meet those in your proposals. Okay, what is an M&E plan? An M&E plan is a written document, and it sets out how you're going to document and report on your project. The M&E plan is going to include a lot of the different things that we're talking about today. So a theory of change, how you might be reporting success stories, indicators and targets, which we'll go into when we talk about the Rockefeller requirements, the evaluation plan, and your data collection and reporting systems. The M&E plan that you'll eventually write for your project is going to be longer than the M&E plan that you need to put into your proposal. Your proposal is just going to be a short preview of it, and you'll develop it more fully once you get the grant money. There are a few different reasons to have an M&E plan. One is accountability, both to Rockefeller, to your beneficiaries, to your organization itself, and to all of the other stakeholders. It puts down what it is that you expect to achieve in terms of actual targets and how you're going to report on them, so everyone knows how the project is performing. It's also a great management tool. You can use your monitoring data to decide whether or not the project is operating in the way that you would expect it to, and if not, if there's anything you can do to help improve it, or if it's performing above and beyond what you expected, if there are things that you need to do to adjust to that, if you want to start scaling it up or something else. M&E plans can also help you claim success. If you've defined what it means for your project to be successful in your M&E plan and determined how you're going to measure it and demonstrate it, then you can use the data from that later to promote your project, put it in further proposals, send it to external audiences, or just talk about it internally. That's the basics of what an M&E plan is. Now we're going to talk about one specific component of it, theory of change, which I understand is very important to Rockefeller, that all of the proposals demonstrate some kind of theory of change and that the projects be able to articulate it throughout their lifetime. A theory of change is essentially what it sounds like. It's the idea that you have of how your project activities are actually going to lead to improvement in people's lives. So why it is that you think your given project creates positive change. Usually, you'll already have some idea of this in mind, and your proposal design process should start with the theory of change, build your proposal further then around that. Maggie is telling me that the slides are not moving. Okay. I'm going to try just sharing the application. Maggie, is that any better? Can you see the theory of change slide? Okay. Oh. Okay, great. All right. So these are the previous slides. We'll make the slides themselves available as well if you want to look more closely at any given one of them or if they haven't recorded properly. And just go ahead and go further on. All right. So theories of change will also help you articulate how it is you want to measure your progress. I think that Maggie sent out the link to theoryofchange.org. They have some good examples there and some good good templates, as well as explanations more in depth of how to go about creating your theory of change. We'll just go through some of the basics now, and it should look pretty familiar based on the resources from that website. I know that Maggie also sent out a template on Wednesday, I think, with a project design framework, which is very similar to this, although some of the, I think what Maggie sent out had a few less components than what we're going to outline here. And if you want to use that framework to articulate your theory of change, that's totally fine. They cover most of the same basis. Sorry, the screen's going crazy. All right, we should be back on the PowerPoint then. So the first thing that you want to do is determine really the final objectives of your project, your long-term goals, and your impact. So for example, your long-term goal might be improved food security in urban slums. So what you're trying to do then is figure out how it is that you get there. So the outcomes from your project might be twofold. They might be increased income on the one hand, so people are then better able to purchase food. And then it might also be the increased availability of nutritious meals. So you might have one or more different interventions that then lead to these project outcomes and then eventually to your long-term goal. So in this example, you have the initial inputs, meals, staff time, etc. Then the actual activities that you conduct. So maybe training, maybe some advocacy and education, and meal distribution. And each of these lead to different outputs, such as skills that then people can use in businesses, then increasing their income and eventually leading to the improved food security. Then on the other hand, the education and meal distribution might lead to things like cleaner water and more informed public. I'm not sure why I thought when I was putting the slides together why that increased the availability of nutritious meals, but it did something. This is maybe not the best theory of change ever made, but I'm sure whatever your project creates will be better. Anyway, but the basic idea behind this is that you put each of the steps in individually. You have the inputs, the things that the project puts in to the activities, which I think are pretty clear, the actual things the project does. Then the outputs are the immediate consequences of the activities, like new skills, better educated public. The outcomes are the longer term things that they lead to, and those in turn lead to the ultimate goals. So once you have your framework, you might include some things like assumptions and risks in it. What might possibly happen to get in the way of your framework, and how are you going to manage those risks? You're also going to think a bit about how to measure each stage to determine whether or not your theory of change and your implementation are working in concert. We'll go a little bit more about how to measure this on the next couple of slides. And then, of course, you design your proposal based on the theory of change framework. Before we get into measuring, we're going to talk a little bit about success stories because those are an easy reporting tool to talk about the positive change that your project makes. And I think that most of you are going to end up writing them for Rockefeller. Success stories are, again, pretty much what they sound like. They're very short case studies of a project's positive effect on one particular case. So one person, one household, one institution, or one community. I have a couple of examples. One is a YouTube video that I think I'll just leave you with the link to. It's of another Rockefeller project and it's a very nice audio-visual example. But in the interest of time, I'll just take us to one of the written examples. And I'm going to switch sharing to the correct application. All right. This is on the USAID website. And it's an example of one success story of a training program in Djibouti. It starts out just by introducing in the first paragraph the person that you're going to talk to. Next, it talks about why this woman that they're telling the story about is having a problem. She had to drop out of school. She has no real job skills. And then she found out about this wonderful youth training program that USAID is funding. So she joined the driving program and got a job that she then she got her driver's license, so she got a job driving vehicles. And then in the last paragraph, it talks about, kind of the consequences of this. It transformed her life, and she now has income, and girls who drop out of school, she says, should try and join training programs like this. So it introduces a particular person, a problem that she's having, then it introduces the project, describes how the young woman got involved in this project, and then how it was a success for her because it transformed her life. I'm going to take us back to the slides. So, as you could probably tell from this particular example, success stories generally have a few things in common. They're short, they're one page or less, about 500 words. They introduce whatever problem the individual is facing, then talk about how that person became involved in the project activities, and then describe the positive outcomes that resulted from that. You'll usually include a picture and direct quotes if you have them. There are some more examples and more description of how to write one at this link below if you're interested in getting more detail on that. You collect success stories really constantly during the project. Your staff should always be looking for success stories during their work, or not perhaps actively looking, but if they find a good example, they should make a note of them. Then at the end of each reporting period, so every quarter or every year, whatever it is the reporting period is, the staff will assemble all of their potential success stories and choose the best one or at maximum 3 to write up, and then you'll submit that to the donor. They can also be good marketing tools. You can distribute them externally to kind of give a nice personal example of how your project is working. Success stories are very nice, but they're not necessarily the most robust method or systematic method of reporting on your project. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the specific monitoring and then the specific evaluation requirements that Rockefeller requires, which are a little bit more systematic. So this slide really just takes the section that the Rockefeller solicitation has, and that's specifically on monitoring, and well, here it is. So the first thing that the proposals need to do is describe how progress will be tracked to ensure desired outcomes. So you should know what those outcomes are based on your theory of change. You just also need to describe how to track them in your proposals. Then you're going to provide details on how the grantee will monitor progress towards the project milestones and completion of deliverables during the grant term. And you also need to clearly describe who will carry out the monitoring activities. Hopefully the next few slides will help you determine how you're going to put all of these into your proposal. Maggie, can you just type into the chat box whether or not the slides are advancing okay? I'm going on to the next slide. So I hope that you can see it. Okay. So the way that you are going to be tracking and monitoring most of your progress are through your project indicators. Indicators are quantitative metrics that you would expect to change over time due to project activities. So there are some examples here. One is number of people who are trained in waste collection using Rockefeller funds, number of youth participating in the training program, or the online portal, or whatever it is you have. And then number of risk management strategies being implemented according to guidelines. So you see that these are all numbers. You could also make them percentages, but they're quantitative. And they're things that are really fairly easy to measure. We're going to go right now into some detail about what makes a good indicator beyond these characteristics. One acronym that's used a lot of the time is SMART indicators. So good indicators are SMART because they are specific. They should have a very narrow definition. So if there's any ambiguity about some of the terms, we saw the term youth being used in the previous slide, you would define those in indicator protocols that go along with the indicators. Though you don't have that included, you won't include that in your proposal. It'll be part of the later M&E plan that you write. The next characteristic SMART indicators have is that they are measurable. So again, they're quantifiable, they're numerical, but you should also be able to collect data on them. You wouldn't want it to be something where the data collection effort was beyond project resources. It should also be achievable. You should have indicators on something that your project will actually affect in a measurable way. They should be relevant. They should clearly link to your project's objectives, activities, and theory of change. You don't want an indicator that's only very indirectly related to the project, because that's not really a good measurement of what your project is doing. And then the last is time-bound. Indicators should be for a specific time period. It should fit with project activities. Unfortunately, you probably won't be measuring your project's activities 6, 7, 10 years after the project is over. So instead, they should just be for the lifetime of the project, and you should know in advance what reporting schedule you're going to be on. There's a resource link for this as well if you want more detail on what makes a good indicator. There's a great tip sheet written by USAID. This uses a different acronym than SMART, but it goes into a lot of detail about other characteristics of good indicators. Indicators are also linked to your results framework, which means that you have different kinds of indicators depending on what it is you want to measure. So you could have an indicator for an input, something like number of staff working on project. You can have indicators for activities, number of meetings that are held. Also, of course, you can measure your outputs, number of people who have registered for a job network. You can also have outcome level indicators, something that are a bit more further down the road. So previously we measured number of people who registered for the job network. Now we're measuring number of people who are hired for jobs through the network. And then you can also measure an impact level indicator, number of people with higher income. In practice, you'll probably mainly be focusing on activity, output, and outcome level indicators. You won't necessarily need to report on inputs, and most of the impacts that your project is hoping to make aren't really something you can easily measure. Laura, I see you have your hand raised. I unmuted you. Do you have anything that you wanted to ask or say?
Hi, yes, Jade, thank you. I just wanted to find out the difference between a milestone and an indicator. I'm just not quite clear because are the two interchangeable or are they different things?
They can sometimes overlap, but you might think of milestones sometimes as being phases of the project or things that you need to accomplish. Whereas indicators are something that you're constantly collecting. But sometimes I've heard people perhaps not correctly use them in an overlapping way.
Yeah. Hi, Laura. This is Carrie. I'd say, too, that, you can measure your milestones with indicators. So they're really a little bit different. I think Jade did a nice job in describing how they're phases in your project or points in time where you expect to reach certain outcomes during your project.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And I'm glad you found the hand raising icon.
Yeah, it's very easy. It's right there.
Good. Okay. I'm going to re-mute you, but if you have another question, feel free to raise your hand again, and hopefully I'll see it.
Okay, no, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay. Just a few more tips, especially about what you want to put in your proposal. Don't propose too many indicators. You just want to find the right indicators to measure your project. So 3 to 8 indicators in your proposal should be fine. Think about how you're going to collect the data and what systems you'll have in place, because again, you want your indicators to be measurable. You also want them to be useful for management purposes. So they should be indicators that you look at and you think, I know how I would use the results of these data once I get them. You can also collect data that you don't necessarily report to the donor on, for example, on inputs, such as like, are you on schedule in completing your reports? Do you have the number of staff working on things or number of meetings that maybe the people at Rockefeller aren't particularly interested in knowing the details of, but you want to know for management purposes. And it's fine to have those indicators in mind as well and look at them internally on a regular basis. You'll also want to set targets with these indicators. This is how you're going to track progress towards the project milestones. They should, again, link to your planned activities and be realistic, and you should know what time frame you have in mind. So I have an example here of how to set up your targets in an indicator matrix. This is a good way of both laying out your indicators as well as your targets. So we have here one indicator, number of people linked to health insurance through the project. Then you specify the data source. In this case, it's through participant records. You specify how frequently you'll report on it, quarterly. And then you have the targets for each quarter of the year. Sometimes for like a multi-year project, you would have year 1, year 2 instead of quarter 1, quarter 2. And you'll see that the targets go up over time, because in this hypothetical example, the project activities aren't really happening during the first quarter yet. It's in startup, and then they take off in the later quarters. You can also add a couple of other things to this if you want, such as any way that you're going to disaggregate it. So you might disaggregate by gender and then have a separate target for men and women. You might also include who it is who's doing the reporting, if you think that's relevant, but what's in here is really the most important to have. So you should have a specific idea of who is doing the monitoring before you set your system in place. So there's going to be either a person or a team of people on staff who have in their job descriptions the responsibility of collecting, aggregating, and summarizing the data. The summary data then go to the management for project decisions and to the donor for accountability. Now we're going to talk a little bit about evaluation. Rockefeller has 2 separate evaluation requirements. One is preparing for the possibility of a Rockefeller external evaluation. So what it says in the solicitation is that grantees should be prepared to demonstrate and document evidence of what they have done and achieved. All grantees should be prepared to submit documentation and or meet with Centennial Program evaluators if and when requested. What this means to me is that you just need to show the ability to document your work and willingness to comply with the possible evaluation. This evaluation would be conducted externally. You just need to be able to cooperate with the program evaluators. However, Rockefeller also requires you to have some kind of evaluation plan. So the solicitation says this section should highlight how the project will be evaluated for success. It should describe plans for evaluating the intended outcomes of the project. So kind of the the longer-term effects. It should provide information as appropriate for how baseline data will be established for the issue or problem described in the rationale and context. So you need to be able to describe the information or the status of beneficiaries before project activities. And it should also establish parameters for success, so what would constitute success and what would constitute failure. This matrix lays out the difference between what monitoring and evaluation are. I'm not going to go through all of them, but generally monitoring is done on an ongoing basis. It's mainly used for managing the program both from the project's end and from the donor's end. And it's mainly focused on utility, rapidly collecting data, and making sure that everything is happening on track. Evaluation is done more periodically. It's more interested in the strategic aspects of measurement and showing some kind of effect. So when you're thinking about what constitutes success, you probably have already done this by establishing your theory of change. And you've already set up indicators and targets for this in the monitoring section. But you also want to think about whether or not failure means you haven't met those targets, probably not, and whether or not you also need some non-quantitative data. Things like success stories are useful. You can also do interviews like focus group discussions with beneficiaries or key informant interviews with particular stakeholders and get people's general opinions about how the project has impacted the community. The baseline is a measurement of the status of your outcomes of interest before project activities have begun. So if your goal is to raise the employment rate, it's helpful to know what the employment rate is before project activities happen. This gives your end results a bit more context and you know how much change you've caused. You don't really want to use something like the example I've given. Population level statistics aren't that helpful. You might help a large number of people, like 100,000 people, but if that's in a city of 8 million, the overall rate won't change very much. So it's better to directly measure your beneficiaries and see whether or not they've seen change in their lives over the course of project activities. If you do want to do a basic quantitative measurement of baseline and then end line, it's definitely possible. Say that your outcome of interest is increased savings. So you can ask people when they enroll in the project activities how much they've currently saved or how much they saved last year. And then look at the data that your project collects to see that change over time. And then ask participants that same question again at the end of the year. And hopefully it will have changed through your project activities. But you can also choose to do a more qualitative kind of baseline measurement that's more of an environmental scan or a measure of what the general context is. But you can think about what will be most useful and something that's practical for your particular project. And it could be that this is something that is useful and practical. Your evaluation plan is really just an amalgamation of all of the things that we've been talking about right now. It's how you're going to take your baseline measurement, how you're going to take your end of project measurement, and the targets for those. Be sure that you specify who it is that you're measuring. Is it just beneficiaries? Is it the population generally? Is it a certain subset of the population? Specify how it links to your theory of change and why you've chosen those indicators. And then also describe how you're going to be able to measure these different indicators. You don't want to say that you're going to measure increased income if you don't have any mechanism for doing that. Then be sure that you've budgeted appropriately for whatever it is that you propose, because you want to be able to afford to do the evaluation that you put forth. Okay, this brings us to the end of the planned webinar. but I'm going to go over a little bit about how it is that we can help you moving forward. So we're happy to set up calls with you individually to talk about aspects of your M&E plan or any questions or concerns that you have. We're also happy to answer written questions. And then we're happy to look at the drafts of your M&E sections of the proposals. I'm available to look at the first draft, and if you're able to get a second draft done, then Carrie, who's my colleague sitting with me, will be looking at the second drafts. We're also happy to help you think through some low-cost, low-commitment evaluation ideas. So basic ways of collecting data that might be a little bit more systematic than just success stories. If you're interested in any of the above services, please contact Maggie and she'll help you coordinate with us. And Maggie's also going to send out a link to the recording of this webinar and the webinar slides as well, so that you have all the links throughout the presentation to reference. There are also a couple of resources here. There's a website called Better Evaluation, which was also made with Rockefeller funds, and has a lot of resources and definitions about things that are related to evaluation. The Kellogg Foundation has also written a really good logic models guide. So it covers a lot of the same territory as the Theory of Change website, but it's in more of a handbook form and might be a little clearer for people who consume knowledge better in a handbook form than in a website. Okay, so we're happy now to answer any questions that you have. I'm going to go ahead and unmute both of you. And yeah, feel free to ask us any more questions that you have right now. Or if you think that you don't have any questions for us now, we can just go ahead and end the webinar.
Maggie, was there anything you wanted to say to the participants about M&E specifically?
No, I think you did a really good job of covering all of the things I wanted to make sure that they learned.
Okay. And Carrie, do you have anything you want to add?
No, just that we're looking forward to seeing the drafts of your proposals and providing some feedback. It's a very exciting time for all the grantees to be moving forward with these really innovative pieces of work. So congratulations.
Okay, well, great. Thank you guys for joining us this morning. And I'm happy that people were able to make it. And again, we're happy to answer any questions that you have moving forward. Have a great rest of your day.